Begin as we often do in our UU spaces with a chalice reading or chalice lighting. Today's reading comes from Catherine Keller and the book Held, Blessings for the Depths, titled When Weren't We? When weren't we over our heads, out of our depths, pulled down, towed out into the too much? When we were splashing on the shoreline, playing in glee, floating in all security on the edge of the sea? Did we feel the tug? Did we notice? Did we know the force of these currents, the power of the undertow? The waves mount and arch, twist and spiral. They foam, crash, retreat in peace, rolling in and out, endless the dance. The depths invite with magnificence. They tease and they terrify the monsters. Do we fear the darkness on the face of these waters? Do we recognize the black face of blessing when we are swallowed by the deep? When the sorrow, the loss, the grief tow us downward, down and out of rescue's reach, when we at last yield to the abyss, then do we learn its lasting is also pulsing? The vastness of its room convulses, and out of its womb. What fresh version of you? What chance of earth renewed? What world crying for birth?
And as is the revitalization team's tendency, we'll do a little bit of somatic practice to help invite us into the space. So I will just ask you to rub your hands together. Maybe pinch the ends of your fingertips. Rub the center of your palm. We'll just do this basic chi massage to activate our hand. Let's do a long chi massage. We'll take 2 fingers and corkscrew into this little divot in the front under the shoulder. We'll move that energy down the arm and out the thumb. And we'll do it again on the other side. And we'll move some fresh chi in, rubbing the thumb, rubbing the arm, hovering the hand over the lung point, and just taking a couple breaths and inviting white light in. And we'll do the other side. A couple deep breaths. In all the ways that the earth cares for us, still we extract and destroy. May we take this moment to grieve all the pain caused to the earth and all the pain in our hearts by not yet living up to humanity's highest potential. And I'll invite you to do some tapping. Just tap those lung points again. Tap the chest and the thymus. Maybe rub. Breathe. Let us thank our precious hearts that brings us to this work, that cracks open so we may be the wholehearted in our calling. And let us thank the faith that whispers in our hearts that the work we do matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Zahara. That was great. Good to see all your faces. My name's Travis. I use he, him pronouns. And I will now read the land acknowledgement that we use here in Whatcom County in Washington State when we open up any gatherings. We acknowledge that this land is the land and territory of the Salish peoples. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we nurture our relationship with our Salish neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands, where most of us reside today. At this time, please feel free to enter into the chat box the Indigenous territory upon which you reside. If you don't have a land acknowledgement for the area in which you live, I might suggest that you put this first on your list of things to do. It may take a little bit of research for some of you to find who those peoples are, but it is one important way to acknowledge and honor the tribes and nations who were there before us. To find tribal lands for your area, check a website that will be posted into the chat box for you. And I'll now invite John in to speak.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Hilke, and use he, him pronouns. I think almost everybody here is familiar with Justice Washington, but I'll go to do the spiel in any case. For those of you who aren't familiar or who have forgotten, Justice Washington is the Kuzan member for Washington State. We do networking and collaborating to address a myriad of social and environmental justice issues. However, the Washington part is a little misleading because every issue bleeds into others, and geographic space of a state isn't sufficient to contain the issues. So we also try to go beyond our state boundaries. For those who are interested in additional information about the organization, you can go to justwa.org. That's with 2 U's for rather obvious reasons, I think. And just wanted to let everybody know that next week there'll be continuation of this summit. And then subsequently during the coming months, there'll be a racial justice summit and also one dealing with refugee, immigrant, and migrant solidarity. So those are things to look forward to, and we hope that you'll attend those as well. And finally, I wanted to mention that we do have guidelines for gatherings, and I think Al's going to post those in the chat. I invite you to take a look at those briefly. They sort of contain our agreement of how we wish to be with each other in these meeting spaces. So thank you very much. And I think we're basically going to move to Deb now, who will introduce our speakers for this morning.
I'm trying to get other people in. Trying to pass the links on. So welcome everybody. And first off, what I'd like to do is introduce Elle Parks and Travis McPhee and Sahar Mushlachman. And where else is everybody? Okay, that's it. These folks are working with us from out of Star King Divinity School. Well, Sahar's graduated, but Elle and Travis are working on getting their degrees, and they've generously offered to work with us for a time and help us with getting Justice Washington a little further along than what we have been. So I appreciate you guys very much. Thank you for your presence and your participation. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. And we're going to go into, this is the rights of nature session, where we're going to be focusing on the different kinds of movements that are taking place concerning the rights of nature. And we have with us Elle, or Elizabeth Dunn, from Earth Law Center, Director of Legal Advocacy. And I'll read her bio here. Elle brings 20 years of legal experience and a passion for designing legal frameworks that enable systematic change. She has advanced many of the groundbreaking rights of nature laws in the US and co-authored the US chapter of the first Earth Law textbook. And Earth Law, Emerging Ecocentric Law, a guide for practitioners. The story of her former client, Grants Township, to fight back against a frack waste injection well, based in part on the state constitutional right to clean and healthy environment, is featured in the award-winning documentary Invisible Hand. She specializes in drafting laws for tribal nations, state and local governments, and ballot initiatives, drawing on her experience as lead counsel in public interest class action lawsuits and as a law clerk to the U.S. Federal District Court judges. Elizabeth is a leading practitioner in the development of litigation strategies that advances Earth law. Then we have Chris Vorkian, PhD, MSW, founder of the Legal Rights of the Salish Sea. She is and I don't know how to pronounce this, a thanatologist specializing in ecoclimate thanatology. She is founder and CEO of A Grieving World, intuitively, compassionately supporting clients through all forms of grief, including ecological and environmental grief, and those facing the end of life. Dr. Vorkian is the founder of the Legal Rights for the Salish Sea, an organization educating communities and stakeholders to recognize the inherent rights of the southern resident orcas and the Salish Sea. Then we have our own Allie Tharp, who is the co-director of program partnerships of UU Earth Ministry for Earth. She is also an ad hoc member of the Unitarian Universalist Association Side with Love organizing strategy team, where she helps to lead the denomination's Create Climate Justice campaign, supporting local to global action for climate justice through UU faith tradition. Allie began working with UUMFE in 2014 as the coordinator of the UU Young Adults for Climate Justice Network. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies from Austin College, lives in Austin, Texas, and is a member of the Wildflower UU Church. Allie is also very active in supporting local food equity as the board secretary of the Serafina Food Pantry and a core volunteer with the Festival Beach Food Forest, an edible and medicinal landscape on public parkland. So thank you, Elle and Chris and Allie, for being with us today. And I think we're going to start off with Elle first. And if you want to just go ahead and start going, if you need to add any additional information, feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I'll share my screen here in a minute. I do have some slides that I can share, and I really just want, first of all, thank you so much, Deb, for the invitation. Just really appreciate meeting you all and being welcomed into this space. I really enjoyed the reading at the beginning and the container that you've set here today. So and our work would not be possible without the interest and passion of people like yourselves. So thank you. And I will go ahead and, let's see, I'll go ahead and share my screen, I think. And for some reason I have two desktops, so they should only see. Okay, you should just see let me put this in presentation mode, maybe. I'm still I haven't given a PowerPoint in a while. I've kind of just been talking a more, which is kind of feels a little more organic for this group too, but I will, there we go. But I will, I think I uploaded some new version. It's giving out me all these alerts and tips and okay, I'm just going to dive in with a little introduction to the Earth Law Center and what we do, and then provide an overview of the Rights of Nature movement. And I feel like maybe people on this call have various degrees of familiarity with what's been going on in the Rights of Nature movement. So please I know there's time for questions, but feel free to stop and like ask questions. And I can't see everyone, but if someone raises their hand, I'm happy for you to, interrupt me and ask a question or anything like that. So just a little bit about the Earth Law Center. Some of the things we do are drafting model laws on rights of nature, training people to advocate for those laws, and then passing and implementing those laws. And I'm kind of focused on the legal part, but as I think you all know here, a huge part of any movement is these social, cultural changes that need to take place in order for that movement to really, to really get going. And so that is a key part of all of this. Here I just put up Earth Law Center's mission to advance Earth-centered laws and policies, as well as community-led movements that respect and protect all life on the planet. And that also references values, ethics, and beliefs that create their foundation. A lot of this work, we talk about the rights of nature, but a huge component to that is the responsibilities to nature and what we could frame in terms of a sacred responsibility to nature, and recognizing that we're all interconnected. So I'm just starting with a little bit on the question of, does the legal system work for nature, our current legal system? And of course, as you might expect, our answer to that is that it's really not working as well as it needs to. And some of the reasons are nature is being treated as property. The laws that we currently have really, to many degrees, encourage exploitation, allow a certain amount of degradation that's considered a tolerable limit, rather than looking at how to restore a healthy ecosystem and what do we need to do to come into balance with the earth. And part of that is because nature doesn't have a formal voice in government, in many of these spaces and forums where decisions are being made, including in the courts and in other forums. So that is, and then the other problem is that our laws, kind of speaking to the last piece here, is that our laws don't contain adequate remedies to really restore ecosystems and from a holistic perspective. So we have this lack of standing or a formal voice for ecosystems, and then really laws that don't have adequate remedies to address the problems that we see, which obviously calls for the need for a transformative change, transformative systemic change. And this is just to highlight some of the areas, Earth Law, when we talk about that, it's really meant to encompass a broader number of movements, including rights of nature, ecocide, animal rights, the rights of future generations. And I put in here education, because educating, talking to people, shifting mindsets is key to all of this work. I'm going to focus more on rights of nature concepts today, but just kind of knowing that the broader perspective, because they are all interrelated, like the right to a healthy environment is interrelated with the rights of nature, as I think many on this call know, but it's still not obvious to a lot of people. And that's one of the messages we need to continue to carry, is that interconnection, because we have, and I say we, just like in terms of mainstream, Western society has really cultivated that false dichotomy of human nature separation. So the rights of nature in its basic form really recognizes that nature has fundamental inherent rights. And those rights are often described as to exist, thrive, to restoration, to be free from pollution, and in the law that can be described in various ways. But the primary point is that nature is recognized as having intrinsic inherent rights to itself, and then it's also recognized as our relationship with nature as humans, that we have responsibilities to nature, and that nature's rights furthers our own rights because we are all interconnected with our environment. So it's really one of the, if you're into studying rights, kind of based movements, it's one of the ways in which we can express that we value and respect nature in a construct that which is I speak to here, in a Western rights-based legal framework, because that's the kind of the framework that we're in, not to get too deep into the philosophy of it, but that's how we look at things on our constitutions. We look at something that has rights means that it has value, and then it can be heard in court. I heard something, but I think that was just then.
Can the rest of you mute, please?
Just wanted to make sure it wasn't like a question or anything. So the this text was just taken from the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, which was kind of one of those founding documents to set out some of these concepts and frameworks. And you know, these concepts are not new, that nature has intrinsic value. Of course, many indigenous peoples have expressed that since time immemorial, and you can find those in cultural practices, creation stories. But the articulation of them in a framework that interfaces with our Western legal system is what has become known as the rights of nature movement. And here, recognizing the inherent rights of Mother Earth, and also the obligations of human beings to Mother Earth. And that's a piece where, because when we say in the shorthand, the rights of nature, sometimes I think it can be forgotten that that means that we have responsibilities. There's a reciprocal relationship here. I don't think that's forgotten among this group of people, but speaking in terms of, you know, what I've seen and kind of confronted and, you know, throughout my career and kind of the larger space. And this, I just wanted to speak to the concept of person versus legal personhood, because this is a term that comes up in rights of nature, is recognizing legal personhood for nature, which is kind of a weird thing to say, really, because you're talking about nature and then recognizing it as person. But the reason we kind of have that language still, which we'd like to evolve, but is around the fact that just in our legal system, person is the subject of legal rights and duties. So that's the whole thing with, you know, corporations being recognized as persons, you know, ships being recognized as persons under the law. Anything could be recognized as a person if the law so states and declares that that is the case. So that's kind of the language that you sometimes see around like legal personhood for nature. If you read like articles that come out, because so much is happening in this space, I think we see articles even being picked up in the mainstream media recognizing legal personhood, you know, for nature, simply meaning that it's the subject of rights. And you can also just define and articulate what those rights are, like I was saying there. This is kind of an example, just what would it look like for, what does it look like for rivers to have rights? Recognizing like a river having a right to flow, a right to have a certain water level, the right of the ecosystem to exist and thrive and function in its more natural state. And again, like having that seat and that voice at the table. And I think, you know, Chris is going to speak to our work in partnership with Legal Rights for Salish Sea, which focuses on the orcas. And that's one of those excellent examples of what it would be like for nature to have a seat at the, for orcas to have a seat at the table. What would it be like to have a voice in some of those proceedings we see, like the Orca task force meetings? What if the orca had a voice there? And so that's really what we're trying to do. I'm not going to go through all these slides because I know we're like kind of short on time, but I wanted to just note the, not short on time, but I'm trying to be more concise. So Chris has ample time and everyone else does. This is just to note an important point of the interface between rights of nature and indigenous sovereignty, and to, you know, respect that, and including in our laws, that nothing in the laws would be considered to diminish or extinguish the rights indigenous peoples may have or acquire in the future. So in the event that a law could be interpreted to somehow conflict with treaty rights, and that kind of thing, those are things that we need to be aware of and consider. And I'm actually just realizing that this slide deck might not have the slides that I just added, but this is just to give you a scope. Rights of nature movement is occurring all around the world, and actually at a much faster pace in countries other than the United States, which if you kind of looked back at the the way nature is treated and some of the problems we're facing wouldn't be a particular surprise, since nature is treated as property rights are kind of paramount in the United States, which is one of the things that we confront. But you see tremendous progress and even constitutional amendments, constitutional provisions at the national level in other countries. And I have a couple slides on those, but Ecuador was the first in 2008. And just recently, the Earth Law Center worked in Panama and helped pass a rights of nature law at the national level in Panama, recognizing that nature has rights. And so we are working to do the same everywhere, including the United States, and in particular, for me in the Pacific Northwest. I was going to give a couple other examples of what's been going on in this space. The Nez Perce passed a resolution recognizing the rights of the Snake River, meaning that it's a living entity that possesses fundamental rights, and that is in accordance with the long-standing beliefs of the Nez Perce, and provides for delineation of legal guardians. So a lot of times when we look at how do you realize these rights in practice, establishing a legal guardianship body is one way to do that. And so looking at a diverse group of people to serve on the guardianship body, and most importantly is that the guardians are held to the standard of looking out and speaking on behalf of and in the best interest of nature. This is just some other examples of what's happened at the local level. In Santa Monica, there was a local law passed recognizing the rights of nature, as well as in Ohio and Pennsylvania, a number of other places. At the state level, there have been efforts at the state level to pass laws recognizing the rights of nature. Nothing has taken hold yet. So what's exciting is that in this space, we have an opportunity to continue to advocate that happen. There has been legislation introduced in Hawaii and New York that speaks to recognizing the rights of nature. And what we'd like to see in one of the projects that I'm working on is nationwide efforts to recognize and secure the rights of nature at the state level, which ties into our work too with legal rights for CLC and the rights of the southern resident orcas. So on the flip side of that, I wanted to note that there have been some states that have actually banned recognizing that nature has rights or recognizing that nature has personhood. Two of them are Florida and Ohio. There's efforts to overturn the Florida ban. Actually, I just learned that Idaho passed a similar ban. Well, it hasn't been signed into law yet, but I guess it was passed by the Senate. And I bring this up for this group, not to be a downer, but to say that we have work to do to educate people about what they're losing by these bans being enacted. And the kind of pro-ban, groups are saying things that are simply not true. Like, this is a choice, like nature will have more rights than your children. Those are some of the things we're coming out of the Ohio campaign in favor of this ban. And so we need to collectively work to combat that narrative and explain the things that you all know about the interconnection between humans and nature, and that protecting nature, living in the right relationship with nature gives everyone a better life. I've already spoken about this, but Ecuador back in 2008 recognized it in the Constitution. And we just recently had a big win in court there, which was exciting. That the Constitutional Court applied the constitutional provision recognizing the rights of nature to protect the Los Cedros forest from mining. So mining concessions had been allowed, 2/3 of the reserve was covered in mining concession, allowing that activity. And this is an important decision because of an application of what it can mean to recognize the rights of nature in a particular context. And I was particularly excited about it because another, not covering all the things I'm passionate about and working on here, but I have really launched into working with a number of folks that are focused on preserving legacy and old growth forest in Washington state, including on state lands. So this is exciting to think about. What if we had a framework that recognizes the rights of forests and forest ecosystems in Washington state? So other examples around the world, New Zealand's another example of an agreement between the Maori people and the government to basically co-stewarding different ecosystems, in this case, the Whanganui River. And so setting up like a co-stewardship arrangement to recognize that the river owns itself, but we have this co-stewardship obligation. I think there's lots of potential for that example too. And here I'm just mentioning Panama again because it was one of the most recent ones, and exciting because I think, Panama being a small country shows what one of our goals is to get these kind of laws passed at the state level. And I think Washington is actually a good place because of some of the conversations we've been having around the orcas. I think Washington is a place that we can do that. I hope. This is just another example of a court decision that was, again, that interconnection between humans and the environment, which I think is incredibly important for us in our messaging to recognize that. And just some ideas here on ways to engage. There's a lot of ways to engage, but being a voice for nature, using language that recognizes intrinsic value of nature and our responsibility to nature, which I'm sure many of you already do, passing local laws. We have some models and some toolkits and examples for that. I'm happy to do follow up on that with anyone who's interested. And then advocating for state laws recognizing rights of nature, just like some of the examples of things that you can do to kind of engage in this space. So I'll end there because I think I'm a little over time maybe, so.
So a real quick question, I'm trying to go through and find the reference, but at one point, somebody just recently introduced, it looks like it might be Lakanov.
Oh, the environmental rights amendment, the environmental rights.
Yeah, for amending the Constitution.
Mhm.
But this is back, this was a year ago. I thought I saw something more recent about that.
It was reintroduced this session.
Okay, I thought so.
Yeah, I haven't checked the status.
Okay.
Most, how things change so quickly. I haven't checked the status in the last few days, so I'm not sure where that is at, but
Okay.
yeah, that recognizes the right to a clean and healthy environment, essentially. And I think has a lot of potential application. It mirrors what, it basically is based on the Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment, which is what was, what we are actually still using in that case to represent a township in Pennsylvania to fight that fracking well, recognizing that there is a right to a clean and healthy environment and what that actually means in terms of your rights at the local level. But anyway, yeah, did you have I don't know if you had a question on that, but yeah, I think that's a great, and a great advancement. Yeah, that group, we've spoken to them about including rights of nature as well. And I think that kind of strategically, there's been a conversation about a process of recognizing the right to a healthy environment and then recognizing the rights of nature. I still kind of feel like there's space to recognize it in a relationship at the same time and do that in an amendment, but all of it is good progress. I think it's really, as a practical matter, what will actually advance to a stage that it'll become law.
Okay, Chris. Where'd you go?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, can y'all see that?
Yep.
Okay, So Deb, thank you so much for including me in this discussion this morning. It's pretty hard to follow Ellie though, so Ellie, next time, let me go first, please. So I totally love spending time with you, so thank you so much. Deb posted a note in the chat why I choose not to be on Zoom. And I don't mean any disrespect at all, but just hope to bring attention to the fact that we need to consider others who aren't as privileged as the rest of us to Zoom and feel safe to do so. As I noted in the chat, I live in Gig Harbor on the ancestral lands of the Puyallup people. We've been offering land acknowledgements, but I would like to include a nature acknowledgement. And Ellie was kind enough to share one with me from an organization called Land in Common. So here it goes. Nature was here before us, gave birth to all that we know and love, and will endure long after this presentation has turned to dust. We affirm our shared responsibility to nature. We commit ourselves to caring for nature and defending nature from harm. And we strive to honor nature with our lives and actions. So as Deb mentioned, I'm a thanatologist specializing in eco and climate thanatology. And Deb, you did pronounce it correctly, so thank you. For those of you who don't know what thanatology is, it's the study or science of death, dying, and grief. Just a side note to anybody who's planning on getting a higher degree, please get one that people know about. Nobody really knows what thanatology is, so please don't make the same mistake I did. This morning, I want to share a bit about how I became involved in the rights of nature movement. So in my day job, I teach classes at Antioch University in LA, and then I also teach for a master's in social work program. We discuss social justice, and in doing so, obviously we include marginalized communities, and they are those that are excluded from mainstream social, economic, educational, and or cultural life. But when we think about the rights of others, people in the majority often wonder how their own rights would be affected. And I always question, why can't we all have the rights to live healthy, happy lives, living in harmony with one another, including nature? So we often see the groups listed in the slide, but I believe that nature should also be included. Because the way I see it, we can't really separate social and environmental justice, especially as we're seeing more clearly now than ever just how much injustice there is when it comes to climate change. But while climate change is impacting the poor, people of color, indigenous communities, elderly, and children, let's not forget how much it's impacting the lives of our wild cousins. As mentioned earlier, we pollute, abuse, murder, harass, assault, poison, and destroy nature at almost every turn in our daily lives. And yet somehow we seem to think that by doing all these things, we'll be safe from harm ourselves. Aren't we quite an arrogant species? All this injustice can cause some of us to react with feelings of grief and anxiety. So in 2001, I coined these terms when I conducted doctoral research on environmental grief, asking scientists how they were coping with the decline of the southern resident orca in the Salish Sea. When I spoke about environmental grief, it seemed to trigger memories of the Exxon Valdez oil spill in 1989 that dispersed 11 million gallons of crude oil across Prince William Sound in Alaska. I'm pretty sure some of you remember that. Birds, orca, and gray whales, and countless others were decimated. At the time, though, we thought that was the worst oil spill in the US, and nothing could surpass that. But then in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig operated by British Petroleum exploded, killing 11 people and spilling more than 200 million gallons of crude oil into the Gulf of Mexico over 87 days. And dolphins, turtles, loons, sperm whales, and others died in record numbers. I've seen some people in the mental health field question those who are experiencing environmental grief and ecological grief. Some don't understand why people would grieve over the loss of an animal, a tree, a species, another being, because they themselves never felt that sort of connection or relationship before. We don't need to understand the relationship someone has with another being. We just need to support them. Today, so many people are doing their best to cope with all forms of grief that it could be extremely overwhelming for those who are on the front lines, like the scientists studying the animals and species that are dying in record numbers, the environmental lawyers like Ellie and others fighting a system that was meant to protect the corporations, not the environment, the activists doing all they can to keep the animals and the beings they love from extinction. And let's not forget the firefighters who are battling the wildfires, witnessing the deaths of our wild cousins. For me, the rights of nature is what helps me cope with the environmental grief I feel. In fact, in grief work, I often encourage people to harness their grief and do something to help them heal. Take action like those who created the organization Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They use their grief to change laws. And I see that we're doing something similar with the rights of nature. So in 2016, a group of friends and I in Gig Harbor learned about the rights of nature movement through the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. In 2018, we hosted a Rights of Nature workshop and met Michelle Bender, who's with Earth Law Center. She's the Oceans Campaign Director. From that moment, we began our partnership with Earth Law Center to support the Rights of Nature Salish Sea campaign. Michelle was awesome. She introduced us to Ellie and to other people, and we're able to collaborate with people who are doing rights of nature work all over the world. And it's just a wonderful, incredible community of supportive people. So we originally focused on the Salish Sea, given our name, Legal Rights for the Salish Sea, but figuring that as long as the Salish Sea was healthy, the Southern residents would also thrive. So no matter if we focused on the Southern residents or the Salish Sea, both would benefit. But we had an issue because once we began speaking about legal rights for the Salish Sea, we learned a few things. One, people didn't know what the Salish Sea was. So they knew Puget Sound, but didn't realize that Puget Sound was part of the Salish Sea. And then two, it was difficult for people to actually relate to a sea. So when Tahlequah lost her calf in 2018, we decided to focus on the Southern residents. If you recall, Tahlequah carried her dead calf for 17 days on what some people referred to as her tour of grief. When she was tired, her loved ones and other members of her pod helped her. Thankfully, in 2020, in September, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Phoenix. When I was a hospice social worker, I remember nurses remarking quite often, actually, on the companion animals of some of our patients who, when we would look at the patient and their animal companion resting next to them, sometimes it looked like the animal companion was going to die at any moment. And we were always so concerned about how the patient was going to react if that happened. But what was so remarkable is that the animal companions waited. And once their loved one died, the animal companion would die minutes or hours later. It was just amazing. Our relationship with nature isn't just one-sided. And our animal companions and wild cousins feel grief just as much as we do. And we need to recognize and consider that. And for those people who don't believe that animals grieve or have emotions, then I encourage them to read the work of Dr. Barbara King, who's studied animal emotions extensively. So why save the Southern resident orca? I'm asked this question, and my response these days is just asking why not save them? When it comes to the Southern residents, they're an apex predator. They help maintain the Salish Sea ecosystems. But when humans get in the picture, we often throw ecosystems off balance. The Southern residents have a unique language and culture than any other orcas. And just in case you aren't aware, I'm sure you all are, that orcas and killer whales are actually dolphins, which is why we're referring to them more as orca these days. So the Southern residents include 3 distinct pods, the J, K, and L pods. In total, we've got 75 members, and that includes Scullochoctonaut, also known as Tokatai or Lolita. The Lummi Nation see the Southern resident orca as their relatives, as their kin, and that relationship should be respected. I see Ron, as I mentioned before, as my way of coping with environmental grief. it's far too easy for any of us to stay in bed with the blankets covering our heads, just waiting for this nightmare to end. But we can't do that. We have to take action. So in the past, I would write letters, protest, attend rallies, you name it. But whales continued to get slaughtered. In 2011, I wrote an article asking who owns nature, because I couldn't understand how we allowed a select few to destroy nature for their own greed and use nature as their own in entertainment, as whatever they wanted, exploiting nature. In fact, today I cringe whenever I see animals in movies or on TV. And I confess too that I actually yell at the TV when I see people washing their hands while they leave the water up running. But what I love about the rights of nature movement is that it's different because it's about changing the laws. Rights of nature laws have been adopted, as Ellie said, in other countries. And in the US, we might be a little bit slower, but we're growing and we're getting stronger. So this might help explain a few things, though, too, about the issue with captivity. Some of you might be old enough to remember the Twilight Zone series with Rod Serling. There was an episode called People Are Alike All Over, and it originally aired in 1960. I saw repeats of it when I was growing up, and it really had a huge impact on me. So in the episode, 2 astronauts crash land on Mars, and the survivor finds that the people look like humans and are very friendly towards him. So he feels very comfortable. He's given a home that looks no different from those on Earth. Later, he discovers that none of the doors or windows open. A wall opens up and he sees the Martians looking in at him through the bars and a sign that reads, "Earth creature in his native habitat." So Scully Choctonaut was born around 1966. She was kidnapped from Penn Cove on August 8th, 1970, and delivered to the Miami Seaquarium, in September of that year. She was one of 7 young whales sold to marine parks around the world. She's been living in a dilapidated tank, and her life has been at risk during severe storms and hurricanes. She has been in captivity and forced to perform for 52 years. So just consider this. During the pandemic, humans were freaking out about being stuck in their homes after a few days. Scully Choctonaut is no longer having to perform. The new owners of the Miami Seaquarium are considering what to do with her, and there is talk of her being returned to her home here in the Salish Sea, but people are concerned that she might not survive the trip. Howard Garrett from the Orca Network said that there has never been any death in transporting orcas, but there have been deaths due to of orcas in captivity. The other concern is if she does get back home, will she survive? So I refer back to my end of life care work. When I ask people where they want to die, most people say that they want to die in their own home. So we're hoping that Scully Choctonaut will be released and moved back to her home here in the Salish Sea. But even if she makes it here, but only has a few months or weeks or even hours left to live, she'd at least be surrounded by those who love her. The southern residents are listed as endangered in both the US and Canada. As I mentioned, our name came about because we were focusing on the Salish Sea, but the sea is so vast that it's hard for people to relate to it. They can relate more to the southern residents, and people do. I receive emails from people all over the world begging us to do what we can to save them. The southern residents were seen regularly for years, which is why so many people flocked here and moved to the San Juan Islands, where they were often seen. Today, we're not sure when, where, or if they will come back because there's not enough Chinook salmon for them to eat, which is their preferred food choice. So Legal Rights for the Salish Sea is working to educate our communities and elected officials. We've got a draft bill ready to go, or I should say Ellie has a draft bill ready to go, but we're looking for a legislator to introduce it into legislation so we could finally give the southern residents the legal protections they should already have. So I recognize that given all the chaos we're living in these days, that some might not consider the southern residents important. But I hope someday soon that we'll learn to value nature above all else, because if we don't, we're going to continue to see more loss of species, including humans. In the rights of nature, we've got people suing over the right to healthy air and ecosystems, as Ellie had mentioned. We are tearing down the structures that have held us captive in a world that supported a select few. Those people are now fighting to maintain their power. The more we fight back, the harder they will fight. But we are becoming the majority now, and that's what they are afraid of. In rights of nature, legal teams, like the ones that Ellie's working on, are finding loopholes in the laws to help support nature. Each time a loophole is found, corporations lobby to change the laws to benefit them. But we're calling them out on their actions, and they are running scared. And when I say we, I mean mostly Ellie and all the other lawyers. There's a lot of depressing stuff going on in our world right now, but please do not give up hope. The Southern residents are depending on you. Nature is depending on you. We've seen in the past decade just how much our world has changed. Geez, in the last couple of years, we've seen how much it's changed. And no one ever said it would be easy, but the more of us doing the work, pushing for change, finding solutions to all the problems we created, the faster we'll get to a place of peace and harmony with all. If you're interested in this work, please join us. We are always looking for more, as we call them, pod members. Ideally, we'd like to have quote unquote sub pods in many communities so people can connect with their legislators and be that squeaky wheel we're so often told gets the grease. Legislators have actually told us we need to be that wheel, so please come and squeak with us. It's fascinating to look back through the years and see how far we've come and how much I've evolved since learning about rights of nature 6 years ago. There's still so much to do. I look back and note that I've been working to save whales for far too many decades. I don't plan on stopping anytime soon, but seriously, when are they going to finally be saved? I'm not sure I'm going to be alive to see that day, but I pray that you will be. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Allie. Maybe
I
you're
feel
go
that
for it.
I know we have this really emotional, moving moment. I'm feeling that too. I know I'm kind of mirroring that. I just wonder if we could take a collective breath and honor the amazing work of Chris and Ellie and everyone in this coalition. Just take a moment to honor, witness, and feel gratitude for that. Thank you. It is truly an honor to be on this panel with you too, Ellie and Chris. The work you're doing is just amazing, so important. So deep, heartfelt thank you for that. And I am probably the only person in the room not from Washington, though I do love Washington, and it's really good to be here with you all. I'm based in Austin, Texas, and I work for the UU Ministry for Earth. And so my role on this panel is really just to tell you a little bit more about what Unitarian Universalism is doing around the rights of nature from a denominational perspective and with UU Ministry for Earth, and then really just to cheerlead and encourage you to work with all the great stuff that Justice Washington is doing in partnership with folks like Ellie and Chris. So truly, what's happening in Washington with Justice Washington's support for this rights of nature work in partnership with tribal activists and leaders and with groups like Earth Law Center and the Legal Rights for the Salish Sea is truly some of the most grounded, most important work on the rights of nature happening in our denomination. So I just want to say, this is it. Like you are kind of at the leading edge of you work on the rights of nature. So please do join this working group and support the work of this group with Justice Washington, because it's so clear that there's really strong partnerships, really strong potential to make a difference. So that's my cheerleading piece. And I will go ahead and just give you a little bit more. I know some of you in the room know UU Ministry for Earth well, and we've worked together, but perhaps others are like, who is this person? there's a ministry for Earth. Wow. So I do want to just back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about us and what we do and me and who I am. So I joined UU Ministry for Earth in 2014. Again, my name's Allie Tharp, and I'm the co-director for programs and partnerships. And so a lot of that looks like organizing our educational programs, our partnerships for activation, and really just helping to be, I'll share our mission is to be a wellspring of spiritual and educational grounding and practical support for bold, accountable action for environmental justice, climate justice, and the flourishing of all life. So we really seek to balance the rights of all life, the flourishing of all life with the justice issues within this kind of human frame of how we interact with the environment and the environmental consequences of human action, knowing that we also have environmental racism, environmental classism, where disproportionate impacts of environmental degradation land differently within different groups of people. So we strike a balance. We seek both to support the rights of nature, the rights of all life to flourish, and also the rights of marginalized and most impacted communities. And to do that, our vision is for reverence, gratitude, and care for each other and the living earth being central to the lives of all people. And we ground our work in faith and spirituality, environmental justice, partnership, and collective action. So UU Ministry for Earth is based in Portland, Oregon. We have a small office at the First Unitarian Church in Portland, where our office manager, Sabrina, is based. And then I live in Austin, Texas, and our other co-director is the Reverend Daniel Lawler, based in Brooklyn, New York. So that's our core staff. We also have a coordinator for a UU Young Adults for Climate Justice Network, as well as a coordinator of a Black, Indigenous, and People of Color caucus for UUs and partners to provide peer support and nourishment for UUs of color and partners of color who work closely with us. So that's kind of the container of what I bring and represent today. And I wanted to just speak to, this is probably obvious to most of you, but why is the rights of nature relevant to Unitarian Universalism and what we believe as a faith community? And so I'll just speak briefly to our 7th principle for respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. So we see, how can we respect the interdependent web when it comes to life on our planet if we're only honoring the rights and privileges of one species out of millions of species on our planet? So that interdependence of all existence and how we embody respect for that, we don't really see that, as Ellie was saying, within our legal systems and frameworks and the way that we've built our social system. So by grounding in our theology around these things and our shared values around these things, Unitarian Universalism has a cultural role. That was also something Ellie mentioned, is that the cultural work, the community beliefs and frameworks, and providing that moral voice that, yes, jobs are important, and also the interdependence of all life and the sustainability of life on our planet is important, fundamentally, and spiritually. And so that's a part of what we can do as Unitarian Universalists, is to provide a spiritual grounding, a moral voice on why this is important, that's grounded in our faith. And I also wanted to speak to the emerging 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. And so, going back to what Chris said, nature is part of these marginalized communities. When we look at what being so human-centric, so anthropocentric has caused, we see that the biosphere, our ecologies, the rights of other species are marginalized within this huge institution of the legal framework that we use in our country. So when we look at that, when we look at, okay, as Unitarian Universalists, we want to be accountable, we want to take action to dismantle oppression in our institutions, that's a really strong call to do this work and to show up for creating a more just, equitable, and thriving world. So that's just to speak a bit to how our principles can tie into and help ground and really provide a moral foundation for why is Justice Washington doing this? Why is UU Ministry for Earth doing this? Why, why would you seek to do this as part of living out your faith within Unitarian Universalism? Okay, I need to take a breath and like wipe my nose because I'm so emotional from just how moving this conversation has been so far. So maybe another collective breath and maybe a collective yes. Yes. Okay. So I'll say just a couple more things, in terms of how you use engaging on this. I'll just throw back to, I'm going to put some links in the chat for you. So Ministry for Earth, UU Ministry for Earth partnered with Justice Washington last summer to do a Rights of Nature workshop series at General Assembly that were pretty powerful. So you can watch part 1, which is really centering Indigenous leaders on the rights of nature issues, and some of your partners spoke at that webinar. And then part 2 is me, Deb, and another UU who does this locally in Florida, Gary Robbins, and he's working with the UU Fort Myers Congregation and the Pachamama Alliance to do some rights of nature work in Florida. And then there's also a resource page where we tried to just create hyperlinks to all the pages that have more hyperlinks and examples of, and it references Ellie's work and a lot of the other work. So these are just some take it home, follow up resources that you can watch to, if you're feeling really moved and want to go deeper into this, or even just rewatch it, because I bet some of you have already seen it too. So I did want to share that as like a concrete example of Ministry for Earth and Justice Washington's partnership around this, around providing education and framing to the whole UU General Assembly. And then, a lot of this is showing up in doing the work with area experts and with coalitions, that accountable action piece. And the other way I want to encourage you to engage on this issue is within your congregational life and some of that spiritual practice, community practice, and like just the grounding of how do we embody our belief in respect for the interdependent web of life, respect for the rights of nature. And so I'm not sure that I have screen sharing access since I'm not a co-host, but if someone would help me with that, I do want to invite you all to participate in some arts-based cultural work that we're doing at the congregational level and also at our General Assembly denominational level on these issues. And so my background, I joined a pipeline blockade right out of college, and I realized, direct action's really hard. And what I really like to do within this broader context is using art, theater, music to engage people and be clear about our messages and stuff. So my grounding is in the arts and cultural organizing piece of the pie of what we need to do. And so I bring that into this work when it comes to one new practice that Ministry for Earth is encouraging at congregations is to observe Biodiversity Sunday. And so this is on May 22nd, 2022, and every year around May 22nd, which is an International World Biodiversity Day, and then May 21st is also an International Endangered Species Day. So the Sunday that's closest to May 22nd, please do the slow, steady work of talking to your worship committee, talking to your religious education directors and lifespan faith engagement leadership to say, hey, can we do something for Biodiversity Sunday in May? And we can start honoring the rights of nature with the whole congregation, or even just with a subset of the congregation, the youth group, an adult RE group, or a multi-generational group to, within your context, it might be great to talk about the rights of the Salish Sea, to talk about the rights of the Snake River on Biodiversity Sunday. And, maybe during our workshop hour after this, we could get into a little more nitty gritty planning on how we might do that together. But part of it, so it's kind of an open source initiative. You can plan whatever makes the most sense for your church on Biodiversity Sunday, but one container is to create artwork that honors local endangered and threatened species. And so I'm going to share some pictures with you of the procession of the species that UU Ministry for Earth organized when the General Assembly was in Spokane, Washington in 2019. And so this was a chance where congregations created artwork, and we also worked with the Backbone Campaign, who's kind of part of the coalition around removing the Snake River dams and creating alternatives. So all the big inflatables you see, like the globe here, the Backbone Campaign came out and provided those. But we also have some orcas here, which are from some Justice Washington friends, and a big orca from the Backbone Campaign here, and also a salmon is in here too. This is the California Condor. This puppet was made by, I believe, the Neighborhood UU Church of Pasadena religious education program. And then this is from my congregation, the golden-cheeked warbler. And I love this example. So we had a Kinder Morgan pipeline being built through the habitat of this bird, and members of the climate action team at the church brought the banner to the protests outside the court hearings, trying to use the Endangered Species Act to impact this pipeline resistance that was going on in Central Texas, where I live. So this piece of art was brought to GA, and then it was brought to protest, brought to the courthouse in Austin, and just that embodied using art to share our values and our message. This is another Washington, the Woodinville UU Church created a banner here about bees and pollinators. And as you can see, we marched from the convention center into the park next door. We had some young adults share some messages and prayers on the bridge. And then here's our salmon. And then we created an orca with our bodies. So everyone held umbrellas, and we created this visual message to restore the salmon and save the orca. And the theme of that General Assembly was the power of we, and the theme of our Ministry for Earth and UUA collaboration to try to move our denomination and support local action on these issues is create climate justice. So that's what those two messages are holding and representing. So, Spirit, God willing, we will meet together again this summer in Portland in June. And we hope to do another procession of the species where congregations for Biodiversity Sunday or leading up to Biodiversity Sunday can make their own artwork. And then we'll display it in the exhibit hall, in the hallways. We'll do a procession. And another cultural and spiritual practice is a council of all beings, where we practice representing the voice and the interests of these different species. So we aim to do these things. We need local volunteers, local lay leaders to engage and help make it powerful. But I'm really hoping Justice Washington and everyone in this room might feel inspired to play a little part in this, create a salmon puppet, create some piece at your church that could then tell the story of the work you're doing for the rights of the Salish Sea or for the salmon and the Snake River issue. And then we can once again bring this to our whole denominational assembly and help move just our own culture within our faith around these issues bit by bit. Thank you. I'll put my email in the chat. I really, once again, just deeply appreciate the work happening here at this level and excited to support it and be a part of it.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Elle, very much. We're gonna open the floor up now for questions and answers. So at this point, I think maybe we'll just go ahead and if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll field that out. No questions? Go ahead, Doug. You got to unmute though.
Yeah, thank you. As everyone has been speaking, thank you, Elle, Chris, Ali, everyone else that's here. I'm reminded of the laws that are in place that have fallen apart. Endangered Species Act, some of you may remember when a number of national organizations were working hard to elevate the climate crisis issues facing polar bears, and an attempt to use the ESA was unsuccessful in that regard. But I also remember that the Clean Air Act began to be dismantled about 1980 when Secretary Watt and a team of attorneys from Denver landed in DC and strategically dismantled the Clean Air Act. It was an 8-year delay. I mean, there was already a delay in terms of the scrubbing power of the the coal-fired plants that were and fossil fuel-fired plants. But that law had some teeth at one time, as did the Clean Water Act. Well, and as does the Clean Water Act. So I'm wondering if there's a subcommittee that might be looking at these existing laws that have, through some legal means, some other types of pressure means, been dismantled. But the original acts and some of the the edits, the amendments that and then some of the regulatory part of it, the regulations side, have been strengthened at various times. So there's something there that's still on the books kind of thing. And is there maybe interest in, and maybe somebody's already doing this. Thank you.
I'm sure other folks might have things to share on this. I just want to mention the Endangered Species Coalition is planning a year-long celebration of the Endangered Species Act for its 50th next year, 2023. So the whole year of 2023 can be a year where we're educating and organizing around reinforcing what we already have in law to protect these species. The main goals for the ESA 50th celebration are to broaden and deepen support for the Endangered Species Act and biodiversity conservation, including by celebrating successes and increasing visibility and knowledge of the Endangered Species Act. And 2, to support individuals and communities of many diverse backgrounds and identities to engage in that work. So I would point to Endangered Species Coalition and the participating members of that coalition as a resource for doing that with your local community.
Ali, I wonder, is there any talk around the 50th of clean water and clean air?
I don't know off the top of my head. That one rang a bell as you said it. I'm sure there is, but I'm just not as sure.
Well, and Bill may know. I mean, EPA, was it 70? The whole, and the council, the National Environmental Council that was formed back in the early 70s. It would seem that, Anybody else have thoughts about celebrating Clean Air Act and restoring it to its original?
I think Elle is trying to get in here.
Oh, I was just gonna offer like just a quick kind of response to that, and kind of thank you for bringing that up. I think just to add to that, like when we're looking at creating rights of nature frameworks and new laws, and all of the social and cultural and spiritual movement that goes along with that, recognizing that we have these existing legal tools that are, have been eroded by, past and current administrations, as well, and that they, like you said, they still like have some, utility to them for sure. And originally, some of the cases, yeah, they, like I guess giving a concrete example on the Lower Snake River dams. You might be familiar with this case, TVA versus Hill, Tennessee Valley Authority, was one of the first cases. And the result of that case was actually, quite what we would like to see with the Snake River dams, and me personally, and many others, I'm sure, is, actually saying, well, because of the harm to the snail darter, you have to stop this project. But like since that time, and I think that was case in the 73, 74, so right after the passage of the ESA, unfortunately, the courts and other things have eroded the impact of the Endangered Species Act. And so it's kind of just, but yeah, so I guess it's to say, like, I do spend time strategizing on how we can use our existing laws, but that also does lead me to a place of knowing that we need new and we need new laws, and we need new legal tools because of the entire framework. There's a lot to alter with the frameworks and the Endangered Species Act. And a lot of that is from the practicalities of, how it got passed and negotiations and concessions that had to be made. And I think that's a point too in the rights of nature movement, is making sure that we hold true these values that are at the foundation of what this movement means, that we have recognizing the intrinsic rights of nature. You can't compromise those things away and say that it's okay, in certain instances, like anyway, I could go on to the details about the Endangered Species Act, but yeah, so just to say that like we certainly, and we like the Earth Law Center, I work with people who are doing work in the Endangered Species Act, and definitely want to compliment and uphold that work. Is like, that's kind of like your stopgap measure right now until we have other laws in place anyway, too. And so anyway, just like some thoughts. I'm still scratching my head on how we can use Endangered Species Act effectively to breach Snake River dams. So, until we get a law in place that can actually achieve that result that we need and give a voice to the Snake River ecosystem in a way that we can enforce. But anyway, thanks for bringing it up, because I think that's a great point to recognize the role those laws play.
Gary?
Oh boy. This is a lot. Very heady topic. Thank you all for contributing your various important aspects to this. In answering people about why nature shouldn't have rights, and personhood particularly, well, we've given personhood to corporations, right? They're not people, and they have personhood in our legal framework. I have suffered greatly from grief over as many of us have, over the situation, and realized long ago, and this was restorative for me, that it's not me that's crazy, it's our culture that's crazy. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed person is crazy. And that's what we all are. And when we speak out about issues from a perspective that we're sharing here. But I'm also very pleased to see the momentum growing for this movement and traditional ecological knowledge, the various webinars and so on, and meetings that I attend. It typically comes up now more often than knowledge. So that's something very hopeful. Thanatos, indeed, solastalgia. There, I don't know if you're aware, but there was a paper written proposing that scientists go on, climate scientists and earth scientists go on strike for a year. And the issue of what we're facing is given a new name. It's being called climate trauma now. And there's a paper about this and a whole field of, well, our Salish Sea representative probably is well aware of this, this area. And thanks for bringing up the Twilight Zone as well. I was a big fan of the Twilight Zone. And one of the episodes that really captured, that speaks to this, is the episode of the Gremlin. If you'll remember William Shatner in the airplane at night, and he was the only one that could see this gremlin taking the
Engine off.
the engine apart. Yeah, and you know,
Yep.
he was the only person that was seeing that could see it, and he was taken away in a straitjacket. So we just have to keep up the work. I like Doug's idea of bringing attention back to a saner time when Republicans and Democrats work together for water and air. Now, typically that was all focused on human health, but now we realize that this is our life support system we're talking about. And that's how I talk about it. And I frequently use references from our indigenous friends. And the one that resonates with me most commonly when I try and share their perspective is when Jay Julius told us, when we look out on the world, we don't see resources, we see relatives.
Mm.
And that's the thing. Yeah. So like everything else, it's all about talking about it, making it a kitchen table topic. And art is the way. And in fact, Kaya George, who was recently at a webinar sponsored by the United Student Leaders of Whidbey, which are doing great work down here. Kaya is the great granddaughter of Chief Dan George and the daughter of Reuben George and Deborah Parker, who little tribe, the Tsleil-Waututh, has held off the Black Snake of the West, the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And what she said was, and she was quoting somebody else, I didn't catch the name, it's the artist's job to make the revolution irresistible.
Thank you, Gary. Donna?
Can I just
Yes.
hop in and add that that quote is actually from Toni Cade Bambara, a Black feminist. My
Yes,
job is to make the revolution irresistible, and she's really speaking about the centering of Black women and those at the margins and listening to their solutions for leadership.
Can you put her name in the?
Yeah, I did when I heard it from you, Gary, because I use that quote literally almost every single training I do. It's the first one I use. So I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Okay, Donna, go ahead.
Thank you. This is inspiring. This is my first time with this program, this group, and I'm so happy somehow or another it came to me this morning when I signed up immediately when I saw it. Formerly, I lived in California, Southern California, and I belonged to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Ventura. And we had in our history two women members that actually really saved huge environmental projects by simply getting out and doing something. And one of them, there is a river and forest area in Ventura County called the Sespe, and it's only about maybe 20 miles from the Pacific Ocean. There was a movement in the 60s to dam the Sespe by the federal government. And they knew it would be controversial, and they held some, invited people to come to a luncheon and things like that to educate them on the need for this dam. Well, at the luncheon, they served pitchers of water, water pitchers on the middle of the table that were empty. And their message was, if you don't vote for this dam, these other communities aren't going to have any water, and so on and so forth. A small group left those luncheons and said, something smells fishy here. And ultimately, the story is our member took, and her husband, it went to a vote, and I'm not sure why. I don't have that history because it was back in the 60s, but it required a vote within the county. And they hired an ice cream truck with a speaker and drove through low turnout voter neighborhoods, broadcasting the need to get out and vote against this. The Sespe wilderness as it is today, and that's where the home of the California condor, was saved by 6 votes. And that story always resonates with me. Deli Marshall was her name, and the Marshall Trail, her husband's name, is there in the Sespe wilderness. That if we think one person doesn't make a difference or can't really change the tide, I remember Deli Marshall, who I had the privilege to know before she passed, that she saved the Sespe, home of the California condor, by 6 votes. There we go. We're all so powerful.
And did you have your hand up? It looks like you had it up and then you took it down.
I know, I was just gonna do a heart for we need those. Thank you for the success stories shared. Ice cream truck is really a fun image, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. I have just a quick, this jogs to mention, April 10th is the launch of the UU the Vote campaign for 2022 in the midterm elections. The Side with Love team is hiring a organizer to support state-based initiatives and particularly ballot initiatives. So if there's any rights of nature or climate ballot initiative that kicks off in Washington, there will be national Side with Love staff to support getting organized around these things. So, that was mentioned, and I'm excited to see we're actually, and also for the policy nerds in the room, we have a scarcity of what we can identify for, state ballot initiatives that are moving around climate and environmental justice and rights. So if you know of ballot initiatives on these issues, Side with Love is looking for them. And please do email me. I'd love to learn more about any happening in Washington or in other states that you know of. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question. I can't find my raise hand thing. Oh, there it is. Sorry. This morning, the focus has been on state initiatives and laws and whatever. Often we say starting local is the way to go, you know, city ordinances, county ordinances. And I just wondered if anyone had any comments on that.
I see others have their hands up, but I could just kind of share briefly that, yeah, there's I kind of glossed over that pretty quickly, but we do have a model, well, specific to the Orca rights campaign, we have a model resolution that asks us at this to be used at the city council level, to ask the city council to support recognizing the inherent rights of orcas. It's a very simple, like 2-page resolution. So I would be happy to circulate that to Deb and send to everybody, or however you'd like to see that. And we are launching a toolkit in the next couple weeks that will have that resource and other resources in it. And then we also have a model rights of nature template, which it's specific to rivers and watersheds at the moment, establishing legal guardianship bodies at the municipal level, but I'm actually looking to, which is great. And then I'm also looking to modify that regarding forests, because as I mentioned, kind of a passion that's really come to me is to be speaking for the protection of our old growth and legacy forests, for particularly as it relates to the mitigation of climate change. And so there's definitely a lot that can be done, you know, as you mentioned, you know, at the local level. And that is most of my experience in rights of nature work had been at the local level. There's some limitations as to what municipalities can do in terms of the scope of their lawmaking, which I won't get into here, but there is still a lot of space to do that. And I think the Santa Monica Ordinance is a good example of kind of what a municipality can do within their limitations, but still recognizing the establishment of a guardianship body. I mean, one example can be similar to the way cities, you know, have task forces. You can establish a guardianship body to speak on behalf of nature with diverse members. To bring that voice into different forums. So I'll stop there, but happy to, you know, connect more on that and provide those resources that we have, and we're developing more of those as well.
It seems like a good way to make the education and cultural change to be able to speak to our neighbors about it, to, you know, to build the support for the state and federal laws.
Yes, definitely. And thank you for bringing it up, because absolutely agree. And we'll definitely share those materials.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Oops,
I
go
see
ahead.
John has a hand.
Yeah.
John, real quick, I just want to mention the, you know, Florida and Ohio banned rights of nature's ordinances because there were local things that were passed, right? You know, so it's just, I want to name that there's this connection. If you do it locally, but your state's not on board, like regressive states will ban the right to do it locally. So we got to work at both fronts.
My question is actually quite similar to Cindy's but in a different sort of context. At least historically, one of the ways that we've tried to protect against abusive industrial processes is through zoning. And I wondered if there's any options that you've identified to use zoning in this way that could effectively say, you know, it's fine if you want to do that upstream, but it can't go through the stream as it goes through our place because that's illegal. And wondered if there's anything that you've investigated along those lines.
I feel like that question is probably directed to me.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, that could be a whole other topic. And I think that's a good point. There is some potential with zoning, and there's some organizations, you know, interested in that, you know, what you can do with zoning. Zoning still has some limitations, but I think we can frame zoning in a way that recognizes the, you know, the inherent rights of nature. Like there's part of I mean, that's coming up in the case that I've been litigating regarding the banning of fracking waste, in Pennsylvania. It was this question of, when zoning becomes an outright ban, and so is it banning the activity, then is that ban prohibiting an activity that's otherwise allowed under state law, which is where you get into that preemption question. You kind of have the two layers at the municipal level. Is the preemption, there's state and federal laws where a system is set up to preempt those, and then there's a scope of authority, like in what areas can municipalities enact laws. But there is room within the traditional public, protection of public health and safety and welfare, as in that context, to enact laws that can, and to some degree, provide greater protection. So the trick is, like Ali spoke to, is that there's always like these industry interests at the state level that are lobbying and well connected to try to squash those local efforts. And so, I spent a lot of time trying to get municipal lawmaking out of that like kind of structure of being preempted by looking at ways that we could articulate that. And one way is actually by using the environmental rights amendment concept, that there is a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment or a right to nature, and that local laws therefore advancing that right at the constitutional right cannot be preempted. And that's actually something that we're still testing. I'm still consulting on that case in Pennsylvania, which will have impacts for around the country, and in terms of how the constitutional right can be used to advance the ability to make local laws. But there's an argument we're making and trying to test there. But so I'm happy. Yeah, anyway, so long story short, I think there is potential to try to push the envelope within that. We do come up against those structures, but I think that there is still space. And I know there's another organization, well, there's a lot of, STAND, folks might have connections with them, right? I spoke with Matt there, I think. And I actually do reconnect, because they have a lot of interest in kind of decolonizing the permitting system, and like how far you can push the bounds of municipal lawmaking in this space. So I think they're a great partner to loop in this conversation, because they've been looking at that pretty intensely. But I think there's some space there. Probably didn't fully answer your question, but it's a good issue.
Good start.
Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you. So Ellie, it sounds like you were just talking kind of on the constructive side of things. And what had occurred to me is with the state bans that have occurred, what does that mean? Does that not just negate ESA, Endangered Species Act, and other federal laws? I mean, aren't those just essentially illegal? I mean, in terms of some of the other overarching legislation we have in the country?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, it's kind of what is the interplay between the Endangered Species Act and existing laws, and some of these state laws we're seeing that are banning recognizing the rights of nature, like that. So basically, the difference is the fact that like the Endangered Species Act does not give nature standing. Like if you think of it in the really like strictly legal sense, the question of who speaks in court is the question of standing. And like one of the, I didn't reference, but origins of the rights of nature movement in the Western legal construct is attributed to an essay by Christopher Stone called "Should Trees Have Standing?" And that was in the 70s, and it was cited in a Supreme Court case. And that was sort of like the first introduction of this concept. And it was addressing the issue of opposition to like environmental groups getting opposed by industry and such, saying you don't have standing to speak on behalf of this ecosystem. And so they were winning because they were whittling away at this ability for citizen suit standing, basically, which is the name for the type of standing used under the Endangered Species Act and such. But so these state laws don't impact the Endangered Species Act, because the way they're phrased is to say basically that nature cannot be a legal person. It does not have standing to appear in court. And so they're just, and the one in Idaho actually says, it actually started as an artificial intelligence ban, saying that artificial intelligence cannot be considered a person, and then added in environmental elements and non-human species, and got kind of comprehensive. But that's basically to say in the context, they don't have a voice in court. So it doesn't like ban the concept completely in all contexts. And so, yeah, so, but it provides a good forum to be like I said, you know, the messaging of like all uniting around giving this messaging and clarifying like how these bans are destructive and harmful, because we have these, as in any issue, right? The very powerful industry associations putting out their propaganda on false, you know, misinformation, basically.
Okay, that makes sense. And they just want everyone to have to default to the ESA and the dysfunction of the system, stick with the dysfunction.
Yeah, they basically, I mean, they've kind of captured, you know, as I think a gentleman spoke to earlier, right? The ESA started out as like a pretty good law, and it's kind of known as one of our strongest laws. And then it was enforced, you know, pretty well by the courts. And then, you know, in the case even of the snail darter, in the Tennessee Valley Authority case, what happened there ultimately was the court said, block the dam, it violates Endangered Species Act. Well, they lobbied Congress and got an exemption under the law. So it went forward and they built the dam. So, you know, and that's just like what we're up against. But that's why this whole movement of like this cultural and spiritual connection is such an important part of this, because people need to come to realize, like in their hearts too, not just their minds, like what is happening. Yeah, so, but you know, look at what's happening in other countries where this is happening. You know, the president of Panama read this bill recognizing the rights of nature and was like, this is a great idea. You know, our partner like met with them, and so it's you know, we're just, and we are making progress in the US. You know, it's just we're going to have that, as you know, as Ali spoke to, it's basically a backlash, because now like folks are attuned to the fact that this could be a really useful tool and can threaten extractive industries. And so we're drawing their attention, you know, which is part of the evolution of the law, for better or worse.
Go ahead, Ben. You're muted. Yeah.
Thanks. You know, in thinking about biodiversity and protecting endangered species, I'm cognizant that reducing our greenhouse gas emissions is an extremely urgent necessity for us as well as nature. And the climate scientists and the IPCC said we need to reduce emissions by half by 2030, but our emissions keep going up. So the more we wait to start really reducing emissions, the more urgent it is that we stop them entirely. I'd be interested to hear what you folks in your congregations are doing in terms of reducing your church's emissions, and what can we do as individuals to reduce our emissions?
Well, that may be a good one for, I'm sure there's a lot of congregations. I don't know, Deb, what's our time? How much time do we have?
Well, we're over.
We're over. Okay.
But we can push things back if people want to stay for a few minutes more.
Okay.
Because
what
Donna's got her hand up too.
I'll make an invitation. There's a website called createclimatejustice.net where you can set up a profile. Diane, who's here, Diane Brooks is our wonderful outreach support coordinator to help you get oriented on there. And then the Green Sanctuary Program group on there is one of the most active groups. Green Sanctuary has a lot of resources for congregations to audit your energy, figure out within your context what makes the most sense. And it also goes beyond just the energy audit, but the pillars now for the new edition of Green Sanctuary are climate mitigation, climate adaptation and resilience, and climate justice. And the goal of the program is to get the whole church moved and involved in that process of becoming, you know, climate ready and climate justice congregation. So that's a good place to go to find, you know, stories of other congregations who are doing this, and resources and support for that work. We have a congregational climate convergence next Tuesday on March 22nd. So that's an invitation for everyone who's trying to climate ready your congregation. You know, that's a time for people to share stories and resources about how we're doing it. Thanks.
Okay, we're well into our lunch hour, so Donna, if you've got something quick, and then Diane, real quick too. Donna, you're muted.
Yeah, and folks are welcome to stay to have a virtual coffee hour here once we do close for lunch.
Donna, you're still muted.
Oh, sorry. Elle, you mentioned Santa Monica several times, and I'm wondering, where is this Santa Monica, California? That
Yes. Yeah, it is in Santa Monica, California. I can share what that law said as an example.
Okay, but of course, Santa Monica, California is historically an extremely liberal part of Los Angeles County. Yeah, okay, I would like to have that. That's interesting to me.
Definitely, I'll send a follow-up with some of this information, and I think to Deb and whoever would like to see it can,
yeah,
see it or not.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Diane.
Hi, I just wanted to put another plug in for Create Climate Justice. It's based on a group format. We actually have a group created for Justice Washington, but at this moment, only 3 people are members of that group. So if you all could please come join createclimatejustice.net. And once you're in, join the Justice Washington group. It's me and Deb and Bill right now are the founding and sole members of that little group. It's just a great place to share resources and to access wonderful resources and have conversations with people around the country. Createclimatejustice.net. Come on in.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, lunch break. I know people are already drifting off, so if we could be back here at what, 12:45? No, 11, yeah, 12:45. And then we'll get into groups and see what we can start doing when and where.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.